Welcome, everyone. My name is James Salomons, and I'm a zero balancing practitioner based in Edinburgh, Scotland. Through these videos, my hope is to raise awareness of zero balancing as a healing tool through conversations with teachers, practitioners, and clients. Now, in this first video, we meet zero balancing teacher Jim McCormick, who has 50 years experience as a practitioner of both zero balancing and 5 elements acupuncture. And for over 40 of those years, he has actively been teaching both modalities. He was president of the Zero Balancing Touch Foundation for 8 years, and he recently published his first book entitled Zero Balancing, Conscious Touch and Transformation. Now, I'm excited and honored to be organizing one of Jim's advanced workshops in Scotland next year. It's called Verbal Fulcrums. And it was in doing so that the idea for this video first came to mind. We mentioned Jim's book and a number of upcoming courses during the conversation, so I'll include relevant details for those in the description below. Now, please like this video and subscribe if you enjoy the content and would like to see more. Now, without any further ado, let's dive in. Lovely to see you again, Jim.
Great to see you, as usual.
So, I wanted to begin this conversation to, go back in time and think about how you got to zero balancing. So I was having a look on your website just yesterday, and it mentioned there that you did mathematics and physics at college. And then you went on to Gestalt and bioenergetics, and that seems a bit of a leap. And I'm curious, what happened?
There's a lot of history in there. There's definitely a huge leap. A left brain person growing up and turned into more of a right brain person with a lot of work. But it had a lot to do with the Vietnam War.
Okay.
I would have gone to law school. I graduated college in 1968, the middle of Vietnam. It was the first year that you didn't get a deferment if you went to graduate school. So going to law school didn't work. So I taught mathematics for a year, and then I got a job at a place. I got a conscientious objector status. Okay. So I didn't need to go to Vietnam, but I did need to do 2 years of service. And I found this place in Massachusetts where they brought all these people from Esalen to the East Coast to do energetic workshops. People that were famous at the time, Betty Fuller and John Hyder and Will Schutz, and nobody knows their names any longer, Fritz Perls, people like that all came and did workshops at this place. And I kind of got totally blown open by all the workshops I was doing.
So how did you find out about it?
Well, I had to find some job for 2 years. If you don't find one for yourself, they'll assign you to one. And that's liable to be a very bad job that you don't really want to do. So I looked around until I found some place that qualified because they were a nonprofit and they were away from my home, which was important to the government. And I found this place, and they had one half was a consulting firm that worked with people like the Navy and things like that. But the other half was this growth center with all these people from Esalen. And I managed to talk my way into a job there. And then I spent the next 2 years there mostly learning about that organization, but also doing a lot of workshops that by the time I finished those 2 years, I had no desire to go to law school. And then I decided, so then this announcement came from J.R. Worsley. Oh, I know, in 1971, Nixon went to China. Yeah. So acupuncture hit in America. Acupuncture had been in England all that time because you guys didn't break off your connection with the communists in 1949, but we did. Yeah. And so acupuncture hit in America, and Dr. Worsley came over to recruit students for his acupuncture school in England. And I decided to go, which I thought I'll get to go to Europe. It'll be fun. I'll come back and do something real with my life. Who does acupuncture? What the hell is that? But when I got there, I loved it. First thing I really had loved. College was a bit wasted on me. And then I met Fritz, and that's the name of that stung. Just kept going, studying with Fritz. And I mean, I could talk more, but maybe you want to ask something else before I keep talking.
Well, I'm curious actually, because if you're on this quite scientific and mathematical trajectory, and then law school was like the next thing, which is quite rigorous in terms of its intellectual discipline, and if that's the trajectory you were planning on going in, how did your family, your friends react to you going off to Britain and doing acupuncture?
They thought I was crazy. I had been accepted to Harvard and Yale Law School. So for my parents, that was like, the best thing you could do in the world.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And so they were like totally blown away when I turned those down and decided to go to acupuncture. They were like, what? Friends were a little mystified too. But I had enough friends by then in this alternative world that they were all very supportive and thought it was a really good thing to do.
Yeah. So why acupuncture then? What was it about JR's presentation of it, or your understanding of it at the time, that really called you?
Well, again, the initial part of why acupuncture is I wanted to learn more about energy. So I'd been doing these workshops, bioenergetics and Gestalt therapy, and they were a lot about energy in the body. Yeah. And I wanted to learn more about energy in the body. That was the main reason for studying acupuncture. At that time, if you went to China, you had to know Chinese. There were no English language classes in China. I decided I didn't want to spend 5 years learning Chinese before I studied acupuncture. Yeah. And then JR came and did a workshop in New York City, which his teaching was wonderful. And so we went over, and I think one, he was a master teacher, and that was very exciting. And I realized I had never really found anything I loved doing. So I studied mathematics, I studied physics, I was good at it, but it didn't really move me very much. And all of a sudden, being with clients one-on-one and being with patients and learning about medical things was like explosion. I totally loved it right away. So it's the combination of finding the right niche for myself, and then finding a teacher who's really wonderful. And those two things, I was like happier than I've been in a long time. I just fell in love with it.
Oh, that's fantastic. So when did you start practicing acupuncture, and were you doing other work alongside it?
Well, the classes started in 72. Training was a lot shorter then. I began practicing in 73.
Okay.
And during that time, I met Fritz Smith, who was in the same class.
Yeah.
And he, after class, used to work on people doing what was his osteopathic work. It wasn't called zero balancing yet. And I just followed him around. I was 25 years old. I didn't know much. I certainly didn't know much about the medical world. And so I would watch him work on people, and he would share things with me, what he was doing. And finally, one day I said, well, Fritz, why don't you give me one of those sessions? And he did. And that was a turning point, because it felt so wonderful. And the experience itself felt so wonderful. But then afterwards, I felt totally right in my body, like everything was aligned. My body, mind, and soul were all aligned, and it just felt, I don't think I'd ever felt totally right before in my life, actually.
Oh.
And so like, okay, I want more of this, whatever this is. So that was, I don't know, 73 probably.
Okay.
And then Fritz started his first zero balancing class in 73 or 74.
Yeah.
And I had him come to Boston to do his second one ever in 1974. And so I took the class, which still wasn't called zero balancing, but had a lot of the basic ideas in it. And
yeah,
so
that session you received, that first session you received from Fritz, was that recognizably zero balancing? I don't know how much of it you remember, but
I don't remember what he actually did on me, but I remember the experience. And the experience was totally zero balancing. Fantastic. The experience was feeling like he worked on a part of me that I didn't even know that I had. It was like working on my core. I think I was young enough, I didn't know that I had a core. And I felt like some inner gyroscope was being reset.
Yeah.
So it was a very profound experience from one session. And
that's quite something, because by this point you've already done quite a lot of workshops. You've experienced a lot of different types of energetic work.
Yes.
And here was something that stood out as right, as you put it.
Yeah, I had done lots of different workshops. I'd done Rolfing, I'd done, numerous other things,
Yep.
and massage and yoga and what have you. And the ZB sessions were as powerful, more powerful than any of those. The acupuncture sessions were pretty powerful too.
Yeah.
And so both of those were happening simultaneously after a while.
Yeah, so you'd be in the UK, practicing acupuncture, receiving acupuncture as part of the practice, no doubt. And
Right.
then in the evenings, there'll be some sort of what was to become zero balancing thrown in the mix as well.
Yeah.
It must have been quite a transformative period of your life.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you could just, if the pictures would be before and after, like a different person.
Wow.
So it was very special. And in order to graduate from the acupuncture program, you had to do a project of excellence. And Fritz's project of excellence was to teach acupuncturists how to work with body structure.
Yeah.
So as he started putting his osteopathic principles into this project, he started incorporating what he was learning about energy from acupuncture together. And that's what became zero balancing, when he brought the structural things from osteopathy and the energy things from acupuncture together, and it created zero balancing, this new merger of cultures and techniques. And I think that's part of what makes it so special.
Yeah, definitely. And just so I can get a better feel for where you were at the time, what was your project of excellence?
Nothing as grand as Fritz's. I wrote a paper. I'm trying to remember what the paper was. It wasn't a very great paper.
Sure.
But I wrote something about energy and structure, and probably related to all the workshops I had done.
Yeah.
But I don't honestly remember. It
Yeah.
was eminently forgettable.
Sure.
I accomplished the task and went on to other things.
So, onto other things then, you then started practicing acupuncture. Were you in the Boston area at the time?
Yeah, I was in the Boston area. I started in 1973. There were like one other person that I knew doing acupuncture. And then again in 74, I took Fritz's class. And so pretty much almost right from the beginning, maybe by 74, 75, I was doing both acupuncture and zero balancing. And they worked together so well. I still do that to this day. I do maybe half acupuncture, half zero balancing in my private practice.
And I know a lot of zero balancers are acupuncturists, and some of them combine the two in one session. Is that something that you've explored? Is that something that you do?
Yeah, I do that a lot.
Okay.
I would say maybe a quarter of my people just get acupuncture, and maybe a quarter just get zero balancing, and half get both. Yeah. Sometimes in the same session, sometimes alternating sessions, but it's not unusual to do both in the same session.
Yeah.
But the one thing I will say for any acupuncturists out there who are ZBers is if I do that, I don't do a full ZB and a full acupuncture. I do some acupuncture and some ZB, and it still works beautifully together.
Fantastic. So you then became the first zero balancing teacher that wasn't Fritz. So yeah, can you tell us what was kind of happening around that time? And
so that group of us, a group out of the original 35 people that took JR's first acupuncture course, 12 of us stayed together for the next 10 years, going back to England twice a year to study for a week or two, or sometimes JR would come to America.
Yeah.
And then at sort of near the end of that, I went back for another 6 or 7 months in England. So like 1978, 79. And while I was there, someone said, well, would you teach us zero balancing? And I, being young and naive, said, sure. So I started a class once a week, 3 hours, and we were like, could be 8 or 10 weeks. And about 4 weeks into it, Julia Measures, who was very strict, said, you can't do that. And I said, what do you mean I can't do that? She said, you have to ask Fritz before you can teach it. And I said, I do? So I got in touch with Fritz and said, I'm halfway through this class. Can I finish the class? And he said yes, fortunately. So I was the first person he'd said yes to teaching.
Sure. Had other people asked?
Yeah, yeah. I don't
Oh,
know how
okay.
many, but at least some had asked and he'd
Sure.
said no.
Yeah.
So then the next 3 years, I went to Esalen. He did a zero balancing introductory 1 week class at Esalen every year. And I went the next 3 years, I went to Esalen and took his class and assisted. But mostly that was my teacher training program where I would write down everything he said and then began to teach after that. So my formal training was really a sort of apprenticing with Fritz.
Yeah.
And then began teaching ZB classes in, I don't know, 1981 or two.
So it's been 40 years since
Yeah.
you started teaching
Yeah,
Zippy.
at least I think, yeah, since that first class in England, it's over 40 years. Yeah.
Wow.
Since I started studying acupuncture, this year is now 50 years, which is a little mind blowing.
Yeah. Yeah. And such a wealth of experience as well.
Well, it was nice to have that background that I had, even though I hadn't had medical training up until then. I'd had a lot of psychotherapeutic training and a lot of energy experience.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've done a massive amount of studying other things since, and a massive amount of psychotherapy on my own and training in psychotherapy. So I've continued to learn. One of the nicest things about Fritz was his willingness to keep learning his whole life, really a lifelong learning style. And I think that was my style also, but seeing him do it made it easier for me to keep doing it.
Nice. So did you teach a lot of classes together in the early days, or did you go on and did you kind of split up as a team?
Yeah, in the early days, not so much. No, we didn't teach together very often. If I would go and take his class, he would start creating new classes. At the very beginning, there was only zero balancing 1.
Okay.
And if you wanted to take it over, learn more, you just took it over again. And then eventually there was a zero balancing 2, and then eventually advanced classes, but that was over many years. So mostly I was taking classes new classes that he created. Okay. We didn't teach together much until the first teacher training, which was in the 1980s, late 80s. I was assisting in that teacher training because I'd already been teaching for 6 or 8 years.
And how many teachers were there at that point?
Well, in the class, there were 20 some.
Okay.
Out of those, maybe 15 actually taught some classes.
Yeah.
And our graduation was, I think, 1990.
Yeah.
So that was the first teacher training graduation. So that's still 30 some years ago.
Yeah. Wow.
And some of those people are still going, including me.
So what kept you going? Or what keeps you going?
Yeah, still going. Well, one, just that I loved doing it. I loved receiving it. I really respected and loved Fritz. He was someone that walked his talk for the most part. And I really felt like he was someone that I could really trust. And that had been a big issue in my life. And so feeling able to trust him really helped. The results in me really helped. My life gradually got better and better. And the results in clients were wonderful. And I loved doing it. So there are all these different parts together that, if any of those had been missing, I might not have kept going. Yeah. And then eventually I started creating my own classes, and that's leading up the verbal Fulcrums and other classes that I've created. But eventually, I think for a long time, I was trying to be like Fritz. And then I realized I just needed to be like me.
Yeah.
And once I stopped trying to be him and just tuning more into my own ideas and values and what happened, I started creating my own classes. Yeah. And then it became more and more mine. So I'm still doing zero balancing as the core, but I'm adding lots of things on depending on what else I'm teaching.
Yeah,
so that's been very interesting and creative for me.
So you've got your own personal approach, your own personal style of zero balancing.
Yeah, which was always, I wanted to know, so some energy is held in someone, say in a rib. Well, we know that energy can hold information, but what's the information? What's held there? If someone's got something stuck in a rib, is it because of trauma? Is it anger? Is it fear? Is it grief? So you can start to feel what's the content of the energy that's held. And that became the touching the whole person class. So that was my first class that I created myself, helping people learn how to feel what's going on in the energy for the person.
And then from that, you then developed verbal fulcrums afterwards. Was that the next one?
Yeah, because once you start to feel what's going on in the person, if I say, oh, it feels like you have a lot of fear in your ribs, and they go, only a mountain of it. Okay, so now I've identified, yeah, there's fear here. Well, now what do I do with it? I can keep doing fulcrums, and that keeps helping, and that keeps freeing it up more. But I started to realize, especially from my psychotherapeutic background, that if I can work with the emotion as well as with my hands, it amplifies what I'm doing with my hands. So that's when we started looking at how can people are going to have feelings, whether I say anything or not. Even if I don't want to work with feelings, it doesn't matter. They're still going to have feelings. They come up. And the better I can handle them, the better the session's going to go. So I started, and I, at that same time, took a lot of other classes in psychotherapy and started putting those together into verbal fulcrums. How can I use words to assist what I'm doing with my hands?
And is feeling the content, if you will, of tensions that you felt in your hands, is that something that came quite naturally to you?
It did organically, naturally over time. It wasn't something that I just knew how to do, but I gradually started paying attention more. Okay, I'm holding this fulcrum, and some of them, if they move, well, then I don't even pay that much attention. It's moving, great. I'll go on to the next thing. But here's one that's not moving. Oh, well, why not? What's going on here that won't move? And so I started tuning in, putting 100% of my attention on that place. What's it feel like there? And that was where I began to start to, oh, I can tell what's happening. And over several years, I got to the point where now I trust what I'm feeling 99% of the time it's right. Not always, but I can put my hands on someone and feel what's going on most of the time. Not all of what's going on, but a significant part of what's going on.
Yeah.
And that really helps how I do the session, as well as helps my connection with them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Certainly, you know, when we've got our attention fully focused on our fingertips, we can pick up on the quality of what's held there. You know, sometimes like the way I often describe it is that, you know, when one first starts doing zero balancing, it's like, is there tension? Yes, no. So it becomes sort of like a on-off sort of gauge. But then you pick up a bit more nuance. You're like, oh, it feels like there's tension. Yeah, but oh, it's really holding on, you know, almost like holding on for dear life. Or it feels a little bit angry or, you know, and, you know, it then becomes more of a non-verbal conversation almost, or listening exercise that takes place between you and the client.
Yeah, and it's amazing what you can connect with if you listen well enough. But then again, the question, okay, now I've listened and I got this information. What do I do with it? And that's what verbal fulcrums is about. How can I use that information, both in my ZB, but also in my interaction with the person?
Yeah. So if somebody hasn't taken touching the whole person, that advanced class of yours, can they do, you know, verbal fulcrums? Will they still find some benefit if they are less well practiced, perhaps, on feeling what's going on in their clients in terms of the emotional content, or, you know, the sort of psychospiritual landscape that the client's in?
Sure, they'll still get huge benefit, because feeling what's going on with the person isn't limited to what I feel through my fingers or through the ZB fulcrums. Just talking to the person, I get a lot of information. They'll start telling me things, even if, you know, I don't ask. So You get a lot of information in lots of different ways, through your eyes, through your ears, through just being in the room with the person, feeling the energy in the room with the person. And so you can still use that information to help you direct and guide the verbal fulcrums part. So yeah, you don't have to have taken one class to do the other.
Okay. So we've got a verbal fulcrums class coming up in Scotland in May next year. And yeah, quite looking forward to that, you know, getting you across to Scotland. And
me too, I'm excited to do it. I've never actually been to Scotland. That's another added bonus.
Well, we'll be in Samueling Monastery. It's a Tibetan Buddhist monastery in the southern Scotland, so it's kind of fairly remote. But you know, obviously they're used to holding retreats, lots of meditation retreats, no doubt. So they're well set up for doing what we need to do.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So you also then developed other advanced classes beyond verbal fulcrum. So we've got touching the whole person, we've got verbal fulcrums, and then mastery, is it?
Yeah, things just keep growing out of each other.
Yeah.
So once you can feel content, and then you can have some use of your words to work with the content.
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, how do I keep going to get more skilled at all of those things?
Mm.
And finally, we realized the most important thing is your own personal work.
Yes.
What helps you get better. At some point, it's not about learning another fulcrum. You may learn another fulcrum here or there or somewhere, but that's not the most important thing anymore. Once you get a certain amount of experience, the most important thing is doing your own work so that your field gets more open, gets more organized, both so that you can perceive more in the other person, but also then your fulcrums become more powerful because everything you do is more organized and more energized. And so the mastery class was really, which I did with Hao T. Long, a Vietnamese teacher and acupuncturist and zero balancer out in California. We did those together for a number of years. And it was really, we sometimes call it the ZB course without a fulcrum. We weren't teaching new fulcrums. We were teaching ways of working with yourself within ZB. So we started developing a lot of, how do I do a zero balancing? How can I amplify my zero balancing experience by how I set up the frame and by how I use myself as the receiver, but also as the giver. So it was a lot of work about empowering ourselves, getting ourselves, our own fields clearer. And that turned out to be really powerful and really wonderful.
Yeah, that sounds like a really fruitful area of work. I mean, you know, I think most, if not all, ZBers end up doing quite a lot of workshops, not just to learn the fulcrums, but because of the effect that 3-4 days of body work, giving and receiving, has, you know, and can have. And ultimately, well, certainly, maybe just speaking for myself, that part of what keeps me coming back is that process of personal transformation. So to really actually have a workshop dedicated to where that's the main subject, where that's the main focus, that's quite amazing.
It has been really wonderful. People have really enjoyed it, and we've learned a lot of new ways. But ZB just by itself, as you say, is transformational.
It is.
But if you can add other things to it, and those are usually residential classes, and that makes a stronger container and amps up the energy in the field, and just a lot happens. And then we're purposely making more happen. And Hao and I always put ourselves in the soup, that we're working on our own personal growth while we're teaching. So we're with everybody else doing our work and they're doing their work. And then that's what eventually led to my book of Zero Balancing and Conscious Transformation.
Yeah. So
now I just created a new class. I've only taught it once so far, Zero Balancing and Transformation. Well, actually twice now. Michael Orich and I did a class in California this summer, and I did it in Switzerland earlier in the summer. And so I've taught it twice now, and it's just how to make your sessions more transformational for the client. So as you've continued your own growth and your own transformation, how can you take all that and bring it back into your ZB and make it happen even more powerfully for the client?
So it's like the external side of mastery. So mastery is about the practitioner, and then ZB and transformation being, where the focus is on the client.
It's of course both. You have to keep transforming yourself. There's no end to that. That doesn't ever stop. But while you're doing that, it's also how do we do our sessions in a way that makes it more likely that the client will have a transformative experience. You can't make that happen, but you can set up the conditions where it's more likely to happen.
Okay, so this journey then with psychotherapy, so that clearly started before you even got into acupuncture, before you even got into zero balancing and teaching it, and it's still, having read your book, it still feels very much like the psychotherapy thread kept on going and still forms a large part of your own personal development, but also your professional development. So I wonder if you could talk a bit more about psychotherapy and in some ways what keeps you going with that too.
Well, again, so the personal part is it just there's no end to what you can keep learning about yourself and keep expanding yourself and your field. And I find that, of course, zero balancing helps me do that. Acupuncture helps me do that, but psychotherapy helps me do that a lot. So I still see a therapist once a month, and it's really valuable. Someone said to me, well, there's nothing wrong with you. And I thought, well, it's not making, bad normal, it's making normal better. So it's just allowing the process to keep going.
Yeah.
And the people that I have studied with recently, they're trying to get to the same place with their clients that we're trying to get to. They're trying to get their clients to in touch with their core self and to live with their core self, and they describe their view of how that process happens. And so they have lots of maps of that process and lots of writings about what they think, how people change or why people change or what they have to do to help people change. And so I've found that very useful just in what I'm doing with zero balancing. They have there's one idea called the core erroneous belief, that you grow up with some idea that just isn't true, but you live it your whole life as if it is true. A simple example for me was when I was young, I was the smallest person in the class all through high school. And then in college, I grew to above average height. But in my mind, I was still small. It took me at least 20 years to realize I'm not physically small anymore. Or this person, a lot of what I learned from these people is they do videos of their therapy sessions and they show them as part of the training. And you watch how they're working and how they're doing what they're doing. And they worked with this one man who had been beaten by his father. And in sort of like a session from his third year of therapy, he finally says, I got beaten. I deserve to be beaten because I was bad. And that's the way he was like in his 60s. He had lived his whole life as if that were true about him. It's not true. And so we have so many untrue beliefs, and seeing that was really helpful. And again, working with people that have those same issues. And that could be part of the verbal work that goes along with a really good ZB session. Lots of ideas like that. That's just one example of 100 different things that are useful in understanding how people change and how they get more towards their core self.
Yeah, and that thread runs very much throughout your book, which I think was published last year. Is that correct?
Yeah. And that really is what the book is about. It really is about how do people change and how can we help them change. And that's why I hope it gets out to some people beyond the ZB world. I'm not sure how much that's going to happen, but that's my dream.
Yeah. And why is that? Is that to bring more awareness to zero balancing, or to open up their mind to parallels between the work we do and the work that exists in psychotherapy and counseling?
Well, it's both to bring an awareness of zero balancing more to the world and what the larger possibilities of zero balancing are, But it's also just to remind people, whether they do zero balancing or not, there are lots of other ways of doing transformation, but just the importance of that in your life and how, that's kind of the crucial goal, getting to our core self. The early chapters in the book talk about people from the past, Abraham Maslow and other people like that, talking about how the core issue in life is getting to your authentic self, finding meaning in life and finding meaning by connecting to who you authentically are. That's like our main goal in life, once you see life that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so the book is about helping people know that as well, that's really what's important in life. At least that's my view of what's important in life.
And it sounds like throughout your life, that's also the direction that you've been going in from what you've said in this conversation so far. So you mentioned that, you didn't feel quite right all the way up until that first zero balancing session from Fritz. And then, you went on from there to talk about, personal transformation and how that's actually more important. And the fact that you've studied this, and you also learned at one point that not to be Fritz, basically, but to be you. So, there's this kind of increasing happiness and authenticity that you've described in, even in just this short conversation that we've had.
Sure. I would say that for at least the last 20 years, that's been my main goal for myself. If I frame a zero balancing session, it's about, I just want to stay close to my core self. I want to keep living from my core self, from my authentic self, from my best self. And that's really my goal. If I have a decision to make, try to make it from that place rather than the head place.
And have you found, this might be a really silly question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Have you found there to be benefit to living from that place?
Oh, yeah. I don't know if there's any benefits from living from any other place. The benefits are, one, that you feel much better. It feels so good to feel yourself. And two, you end up making better choices and better decisions. And if you make a wrong decision, then you correct it more quickly rather than spending 10 years trying to slog it out. Yeah. So you're much more attuned to what is going on in your system. There was supposedly the head of the Sony Corporation, when he was the CEO, they would negotiate some big deal. And then right before he would sign the papers, he would taste it by just checking into what's it feel like if I taste this negotiation. And if it tasted good, he would sign it. And if it didn't, he wouldn't sign it. So it's just like tuning into your body more, into those almost unconscious parts of your being, which gradually become more conscious, but listening to your body's wisdom, living from there. Yeah. Father Lahr had this great quote about life is a rambling walk that goes best if you let the spirits lead the parade, which in our terms is sort of letting the donkey lead the parade. And that's sort of a translation from an early Chinese text. But I think that's my aim, is to keep letting that happen in myself.
Yeah. I don't know if it ever occurred to you why I wanted you to come back to teach verbal fulcrums in the UK, because you came to Gaunts 2 years in a row, didn't you? You were teaching as part of the teaching group.
Yeah.
And then you came back the following year, you did touching the whole person.
Yeah.
And there was actually an experience that I had with you that second time round, where I just knew that I had to keep in touch somehow and to keep learning from you. And I don't know if you remember, but I think it was the party night at Gaunts. So I spoke to you because I'd done community ZB on someone. Does that ring a bell?
I remember vaguely, but tell
Sure.
me again. I want to hear more. Tell me what you remember.
Yeah. So So Gaunt's, for those who don't know, is Gaunt's house. It's where the UK Zero Balancing community come and do like an annual residential workshop, and it's usually about 4 days long. And at the time, there were a lot of volunteers in the place who would do work, gardening, whatever it was they were doing. And yeah, we would offer community ZBs, during the break times to these people. And I was assigned somebody who I wasn't expecting. I think we were given the names of people in advance. Oh, can you do such and such a time? And I was matched with somebody. Anyway, somebody else turned up. And it was this guy who'd been tortured during the Colombian civil wars. Right. More than once. I think there were 2 civil wars, and I think he got tortured twice, both times. And I remembered very much putting Fulcrums, just doing a ZB and, like, say, doing a Fulcrum through the arm and feeling the agony of, of torture, effectively, of the threat to life. And that despair as well. And I already had some natural inclinations to feel the content, as we've already described. And I remember relaying this to you because I didn't know what to do with it. It's quite something to feel somebody's stuff, and especially with something of this depravity and intensity. Yeah. And I knew you would be somebody who I could speak to about this. So I think we were, we're all having a meal in the dining hall there together. And anyway, I asked to speak to you, and at one point you came round, and we exchanged what was probably no more than 3, 4, 5 minutes, where I described more or less what I've just described now. And verbally, you met me in such a way that I felt my heart glow, my physical and energetic heart center glowing, absolutely glowing. Mm-hmm. And also I saw something in your eyes that reminded me of one of my spiritual teachers, or perhaps to put it more accurately, it was as if you were my spiritual teacher, that same person. Right. And I recognized something so fundamental in that moment that I knew I had to keep learning from you. So that's why, I've kept in touch. That's why we did that distance CB not that long ago. That's why I'm really keen for you to come to the UK and teach more of what you do. And yes, part of it is, I guess, a selfish reason to learn more from you in person. But it goes beyond that. It just resonates at such a deep level that even now, speaking about it, because this is probably one of the first times I put it into words, and this is also, going to be shared publicly. But I still, in my heart, something is really resonating at this moment in time. And it felt important. Actually, I had a dream a couple of weeks ago when I was thinking about, this conversation. And it felt important to bring that up because I feel, well, it's my truth.
Well, thank you for letting me know. I really appreciate it. I didn't know for sure why. I remember but I always felt we had a connection, and I feel that connection with you also. So that was something that I enjoyed and was really glad you were wanting to do this. But this really gives me much more insight into the depth of it. And I really appreciate that. It's really lovely to hear.
Yeah.
And more to come.
Definitely. No doubt.
We've been very persistent. We've gone through the pandemic doing this. So I'm
Yeah, I
really
think the first year we
grateful
planned
to,
it, the first year we planned it for was 2020. I think we
right.
then tried again in 2021, and then we thought, well, maybe not this year, but into next spring. So yeah, no, it's
Again, that makes me feel my heart glow a bit too. So thank you.
well, you're very welcome. It's it feels somehow destined to be, and I very much look forward to, you know, organizing this workshop for you and making sure that everything goes smoothly, so that hopefully we can have you back another time. But one step at a time.
One, I agree. One
Yeah,
step
yeah,
at a time. If this goes off well, then we can think about more.
yeah,
But I think it will, and I'm really excited about doing it. So
yeah.
thank you again for creating the interview and the class, and looking forward to it.
Likewise, Jim.